Welcome everyone, Christine here with a discussion about Tzeentch in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. Now, Creative Assembly is going to release a blog post detailing what they are going to be changing for Tzeentch, or what kind of content they will add for Tzeentch. Lords, heroes, units, regiments of renown, all of that kind of content. But in this particular video, what I want to talk about is the kind of changes that Tzeentch does need. Now, from my perspective, Tzeentch, Kairos specifically, would need a significant overhaul. Though it should be pointed out the Changeling campaign isn't exactly great. If there was anything to be changed about the Changeling, and I'll talk about that in a future video where I talk about the kind of changes the Legendary Lords added in Shadows of Change do need, but if there was anything to be fixed for the Changeling is that many of his quests, many of his schemes actually do bug out. That is one of the things that does need to be fixed for him. But with Tzeentch, really, with Kairos. Well, Kairos' campaign is genuinely one of the worst in the entire game. I mean, you can make it work. I've done so over here, but it isn't an especially great campaign. The one benefit you do have is the fact that you have diplomatic vassalization, but considering how many factions hate you because you're a filthy demon, yeah, it's gonna be tricky. Like over here, I was trying to get both Volkmar and Forik vassalized. That's not gonna work out. I did manage to vassalize both Rakarth and Clan Pestilent. This is the experience if you're playing Kairos. Vassalize much better legendary lords than you, so you can benefit from them from an economic standpoint.
I have seen your name
and so you can have them taking territory and dealing with your opponents. Also, so you can also recruit their units or take their heroes, steal like a Warlock Engineer from Clan Pestilent. Just an idea. It can work. It can work very, very well. In point of fact, like if we were to get a Warlock Engineer somehow, somewhere, or if there was such an army right here, and there isn't, sadly enough, that would be certainly a great thing for us to take advantage of. Sadly enough, there isn't such an army available right here, but he does certainly have a lot of armies over there. Now, what are the problems in Kairos' campaign? Well, his faction effects are meaningless. Oh, battle reinforcement time and hero action success chance. That's useful, especially given the very limited pool of heroes that you'll be playing with in this campaign. But sure. You do get various magical abilities, so as a lord, if you confederate him, sure, he can be nice, but at the same time, I'm not really sold on his, like, fragment of X, Y, and Z, because you end up losing spells in order to use them. So, yeah, you can use various schools of magic, it kind of doesn't matter, because the one he does start with, like Infernal Gateway and Firestorm, are pretty powerful spells. So, all of that is meaningless. The Blue Scribes in Acold Hellbrast, they also take a significant amount of time to actually unlock, so during a campaign, by the time you actually get them, and this is probably representative of a lot of the demonic campaigns with the exception of Scarbrand, but by the time you actually unlock the cool stuff, your campaign is long over. I mean, to be honest, at this point this campaign is finished. I'm just needing to take 11 more settlements and deal with Nurgle, with Kugath, who, well, let's just say a bunch of Nurglings throwing themselves against Forsaken and Warriors of Chaos of Tzeentch is not really gonna cut it. And yeah, Grimgor. And the fun thing, like, I will vassalize Grimgor. It's an annoying thing that you start over here in the Southern Castaway surrounded by factions that do hate you, because you do have the potential of really making a work with vassalization in this campaign. Unfortunately, any faction that you might vassalize that's actually worth it, not the minor scaling faction, but actually a major faction, that's pretty far away. I mean, I guess you could vassalize Scarbrand if you really wanted to. That is available in this campaign, but yeah, it's just kind of not worth it in any meaningful way. It's not really a great dynamic. But what are the principal issues? What are it, I'd say? Well, some of the essential issues, the very big issues when we're talking about 1, economy, 2, casualty or replenishment, 3, hero capacity. Those are just minor things. When I say, like, they're essential issues, but they're minor issues in some ways because they can be easily fixed if Creative Assembly did it. Like, we get patch after patch after patch where they tweak the numbers around for multiplayer. We never get that, or very rarely get that for campaign. Like with income or something like that. But what is the problem for a Tzeentch campaign? Well, you have one of the most awful casualty replenishment systems in the game. And it's not the values themselves that are so much of a problem, though those are also an issue. The reason the percentages are an issue is you have no way of improving casualty replenishment, with the exception of like scatter loci or loci, and also endless mutation, which only affects a certain number of units. It is pretty telling that the Changeling, his first research, gives you 10% casualty replenishment. If only Kairos had that. The problem with casualty replenishment for Tzeentch has to do with the barrier, I'm fairly certain. Not 100% certain, but regardless, you're just going to be in a situation where recovering from any casualties you take in battle is going to be difficult. What's even more annoying about this situation, let's say you get a Demon Prince of Tzeentch, which does require you to get the Caster Sorcerer Lord of Tzeentch first and foremost and get them to a certain level. Well, the problem there is you don't even have a skill line in the blue skill line to increase casualty replenishment. It's only Kairos who has like Legion of Madness, and you have to spend a bunch of blue skill points. Like over here, I just said, screw it, let me go with Control, because yeah, Control can be an issue when you're taking territory. Let me take Control. Like, yeah, you can with the Heralds of Tzeentch, with Kairos, and with the Greater Demon Lords, you can get some, or Exalted Lords of Change, you can get some casualty replenishment, but it's only 6% to 5% to 11%. It takes 20 turns to get this available in your campaign. If this was available like within the first 3 turns and it was 10% by default, and mind you, the Changeling gets 20% for his research tree very quickly in a campaign. It takes you 20 turns to get 5%. If you're understanding why that's screwed up, yeah, that's the first issue. In the major issue, the casualty replenishment issue. Some people are going to defend it. You know what? I'm going to say it. Anyone who defends poor casualty replenishment really needs to understand that the way the game is played right now does not favor factions with poor casualty replenishment. And poor casualty replenishment, what it does really is it forces you to either rotate your units from the front line in and out, or more likely dismiss those units as they take too much damage for you to recover and recruit new units, as opposed to having a veteran army. It is a really bad system that just doesn't work well in the game. So yeah, poor casualty replenishment doesn't work at all right now in Warhammer 3. There are mods, of course, that don't improve that, so I'm sure there is a mod that improves casualty replenishment, but that's just the first issue. Limited recruitment slots is another issue, so there's very few ways to increase local recruitment capacity. Yes, there are some structures, tier 3 and all that, that you can use, but it's still only 2 recruitment slots, and it's not like the units you're recruiting are cheap, so guess what? You're going to have to use global recruitment. The other major problem that could be easily fixed, like casualty replenishment is something that modders can easily fix. That's not an issue. But then you have income. So you start for a relatively cheap price for what it's worth. It's not like a Kislev situation. We'll get into them later. But unlike Kislev, who have to spend a significant amount of treasure to get their income going, you spend really 500. Here there's a bit of a discount, but it's like 500 for 100. That's not the worst ratio, though. I think like anything lower than that would be terrible, and it can go up to 150 if you get Winds of Magic strong or higher. But it's just an income that's lacking. You can't trade. You have decent enough post-battle loot, but you also have relatively high construction costs for various things. So it's not, you're going to be running out of money. You have an expensive army. Like, you want to recruit Sangors for Seiken Cast Warriors of Tzeentch. These are not cheap units. And many economies many better economies would actually struggle here. But you don't want to recruit anything else. Like, pink horrors, blue horrors, they're all worthless. Like, recruiting blue horrors is a waste of freaking money. It's not like they're all that cheap either. They can cost quite a bit in terms of their upkeep. So you have an expensive army situation with really poor income. That is not a great combination. The baseline income of Tzeentch is horrible. Now, you can make it work, not through magic, though you do have an ability over here, Winds of Magic Manipulation. So you have a lot of effects that are based on this. It's a gimmicky system that doesn't add anything. Oh, I can take a Winds of Magic from a territory that's not really adding or is almost full and add it to a territory that could use it. That is such a meaningless mechanic, and it's a nothing mechanic that Kairos does over here. But the problem is how they fix it, how this works. Okay, every resource building is the same, it's giving you the same effect, which by the way means that, oh, you got some cattle, would you want some growth? No, you get the same shit from every single resource type in the game. Yep, it is the exact same stuff. You get income from buildings and you get grimoires. And even that is meaningless, because while grimoires are nice, there are other ways to get them, and it's like you're not necessarily... While there are certainly expensive things you can do with grimoires, it's changing of ways, it's in its own way a gimmick. So the resource buildings, all of them, end up being a gimmick that doesn't add anything, really. Like, you don't care about resource buildings, really. They add absolutely nothing in your campaign compared to virtually every other race in the game. Well, the vast majority. The demons in general are really terrible resources, like so, and it's not even necessarily worth bothering building those resources because they're not really gonna add a lot. Say what you will about the Warriors of Chaos, and this is something people need to understand. Why play Kairos when you can play Village? If you want to play a Tzeentch campaign, play Warriors of Chaos. I mean, hell, play Undivided, play Village, you will have a much better experience. Fun fact, the resource types in those campaigns actually do add varied effects that makes them worthwhile. In a Tzeentch campaign, in a Kairos campaign, all you get is like 15%, up to 15% income from buildings and free grimoires. And by the way, the income is meaningless because here's the way your economy actually works. You get the warp length from every minor settlement and a major settlement, for whatever reason it's a higher tier. But in a major settlement, you get basically the library chain. Essentially, these do the exact same thing. While the library chain does also give you some research rate, the important as opposed to and grimoires, as opposed to Tzeentch corruption, the important thing about these two building chains is that by default, they boost your income by 15% at a tier 3 or tier 4 if we're talking about the library chain. That's one thing. When you have strong Winds of Magic, these buff you up to 30%. So that's why you get provinces like this one that generate 6k gold. Because this is what you're going to do. You're going to take, in every province, you're going to build your main economic chain. You do get some growth. You might think, oh, Kairos has such great growth. It's not really as good as you think. Because you need two buildings to do the role that one would. Really. Like this entire Warplane thing, what I would do is like just put them all in the economic building. Or really just get rid of this modifier effect. You don't need a corruption benefit given the corruption works. Or if you want to have a corruption structure, just add that benefit to, you know, this one. To this particular building. Like add control and corruption to a building, remove the entire freaking building chain, and that's very little. Okay, the library, maybe buff up the grimoires. That's a different discussion. We could use, we do need the grimoire building, but for minor settlements, the warp length adds nothing, and it means it means you don't even want to build resource buildings because the warp length just provides more, and it's the same tier. The library chain, yeah, I would buff the effect of that to be certain, at least in grimoires and not necessarily income. But right now, it's a horrible economy because you need two buildings to get the economic potential to a decent level. And it only works in provinces where you have a lot of regions. Because like in provinces with two regions, obviously the effect is not going to be as significant. You can still generate a decent level of income, undeniably so. But still, this is such a horrible way of doing an economy, to add a modifier, to add a building that's just adding a modifier to an economic structure. It's absolutely terrible. And besides, you still, even with this, you still will be behind. Like in the Abyssal Glacier, where you start, yeah, okay, you'll generate a lot of money there because you have two resource buildings, you get a warp length or a library in every settlement. You get such a ridiculous modifier of income of 150% over here that, yeah, you suddenly do generate a good amount of income. That is not going to be available in every province, so it means that building up these provinces, yes, the money isn't quite as horrible as some other races, but it's also not really that great. It can work to some extent, but it's not a fantastic situation. So limiting the economy, I mean, it's not ogres or Norska who generate 50 income from their baseline settlements, but it's really not that great either of an economic situation. This is what needs to be changed. Buff the economy, remove the warp plinth, just buff the economy to account for missing the warp plinth, because it's like annoying to have to build two settlements for the same for the same effect, or building two structures and then having to build a resource building that's actually providing a lesser effect just to get the good income. That is such a gimmicky way of building structures. And because you're limiting your structures, you're going to limit your unit recruitment on a lot of provinces because you really, really need the money. And while Tzeentch can have a really good variety of units over here, you won't be using most of them because all you want really is the many-eye tribute in a settlement, and you get Forsaken and Sangors, and then eventually Chaos Warriors. That is your army. There's no reason whatsoever to recruit anything else. And I mean, there wouldn't be many reasons to recruit anything else either, but except maybe Exalted Pink Horrors of Tzeentch. But even then, they're expensive, not that great. Compare like Sangors versus these guys. Yeah, we can talk about the entire basic chain of infantry that Tzeentch has access to. Now, third issue, hero capacity. This is important for the sake of campaign variety. I'll talk about unit variety, but one of the problems is like, you can get horrors at tier 3 from a basic barracks chain. You're only going to build a barracks chain for these horrors, but that's about it. Other heroes, cultists require tier 4. Cast sorcerers of Tzeentch, which is so ridiculous to think of that. Cast sorcerers of Tzeentch require tier 5 to increase capacity. And they require tier 4 to recruit. That is silly. I mean, I understand Tzeentch has a lot of magic, so you're not really going to miss those cast sorcerers. But I want to make the contrast between this and Warriors of Chaos, who have so many cast sorcerers in every campaign that you will be running around with more than you can reasonably use. That's the problem over here in a campaign as Tzeentch versus a campaign as the Warriors of Chaos, or Champions of Chaos Village, if you want to go into that specific aspect. Now, this isn't as much of a problem for Village, and you do have good growth as Tzeentch. Like, you can get an enormous amount of growth from the growth building, and your main economic building has growth. But when you need to build warp lengths to actually get any kind of good economy, yeah, it kind of limits things. I mean, I guess you could argue in the early game, well, just go with one army, build growth in every settlement, and then worry about the economy so you can get to those higher tiers. But still, you can do that in a one province to be certain, but as you conquer more and more territory, it's not really a workable plan in a campaign. So you end up in a very limited situation. As for army variety, well, I would argue that every faction, like, the demons just feel insignificant compared to playing the Warriors of Chaos. You want to play a good Chaos campaign, play Warriors of Chaos. Because you have army variety. Like, one could argue that the Warband upgrade system is not something that should be available to every race. My counter-argument to that is like, oh, I want to use Chaos Knights in a campaign. Well, guess what? You're going to have to get a different building than the Many-Eye Tribute, which only gives you Marauder Horsemen. You're going to have to get a different building. It is a building worth getting because it gives you cockatrices, and it gives you cast chariots, and you get cast knights and cast knights with lances. Sure. But it's kind of funny also, we get Burning Chariot of Tzeentch also, which produces other units that you really don't necessarily care all that much during the course of a campaign. Or maybe you get one in your entire empire because, again, you're lacking in money. And your armies are expensive. Sure, I might have a surplus of economy, but you might notice I'm out of money over here. Like, this is the problem when you have to pay a lot for structures to get any kind of economic potential. You're just going to end up running out of money in a campaign. You can make it work for vassalization, but there's other factions that can vassalize. And it's not like Kairos is anything special in vassalization. In fact, he's kind of mediocre in terms of vassalization. Vassalization is absolutely a really powerful mechanic, undeniably so. But Kairos is just meaningless meaningless compared to like the subjugation or the Slaneshi seduction, or or the seductive influence that you have with Slaanesh. So you look at the Kairos campaign, you look at the Tzeentch campaign, it just ends up feeling nothing special. And Kairos, for all his powerful battle magic, doesn't really feel that meaningful in the campaign situation either. That leaves the Changing of Ways. The Changing of Ways is a gimmick. Sure, it's a bit funny to force peace, break alliances, open gates so you don't need Siege Attacker. Absolutely, there's some decent stuff over here, but to be honest with you, this is just a gimmick. The only thing that's kind of meaningful is like when you transfer over a settlement to yourself and then sell it to another faction to get the vassalization agreement. That is all. Like, so for instance, I transferred over the settlement and then I sell it back to Reponse. Okay, right. It's like, ooh, I got the defensive alliance with Reponse over here. Cute. Yeah, Kairos being allied with Reponse ends up being a bit absurd. But that's it. It's just gimmicky things that, yes, you can use to your advantage in a campaign, but you're not going to struggle winning territory if you have an army that's full HP. It's getting that full HP army and getting an army like this on the field in the first place because it costs 5,000 and you struggle to generate that money. That's going to be a problem. And I can also talk about the shit starting position over here against Techless. To be fair, you at least have a teleporting stance. Though I gotta mention this about the teleporting stance. You have a stance that allows you to teleport. It sounds great, right? Here's the thing. It costs Winds of Magic to use, and yes, you're immune to most attrition. You know what's gimmicky about this one? And this is how Tzeentch feels. It's like it's a nothing race, really, in general. Nothing faction. This is the gimmick. Yes, you can research something that takes a decent amount of time to, like it's turn 67 and now I'm getting it. You can research teleport to not cost anything, to be sure, but it's like you're spending 60 turns or so of a campaign to get to the position that the Greenskins, Skaven, and Dwarves have by default, or Leafanar, or Wood Elves. I'm not saying the teleport stance is a benefit, to be honest with you. Like, at all. Like, ooh, you can teleport. It's like, okay, others can use the underway. Why exactly does it cost money? That's a different discussion. And the problem, by the way, with the Changing of Ways is that, okay, it would be a better mechanic if it wasn't 10-turn cooldowns or very long cooldowns in many, many cases. Like, yeah, you know, improving, like, yeah, resetting movement for a faction, including a faction that has taken a territory. That's cool. That's nice. If you can actually use it, that's an interesting mechanic that you could use during the course of your campaign. But it's like the cooldown is so significant that it just ends up being a gimmick. That's the reason it's a gimmick. It's because, simply put, it doesn't really... It's not something you're gonna use except once every 10 turns, which... Yeah, even with the pacing of, like, that Creative Assembly wanted us to have in Realms of Chaos, it's still a gimmick, because even at 120 turns, that just means you're at most going to use this stuff 12 times, and never mind the fact that outside of Transfer Settlement, you don't have anything available without research, which takes turn to unlock, so realistically you're only going to use it in a very limited capacity. If Kairos had many more abilities of using Changing of Ways, sure, though I think that would make it very annoying to deal with him because he would just trolling. I mean, he already trolls you with transfer settlements, and basically if you're near a Tzeentch faction you want to declare war on that Tzeentch faction for no odd reason so they don't troll you. But that's kind of, I guess, the issue with Tzeentch. It's a troll race. It's not a race that has a great gameplay, it's just a troll to screw around, more or less. But they're not even fun at doing that, because it's like, you've got better races for that. You want to screw around in a campaign, play any of the Warriors of Chaos. That is a much, much better dynamic to be dealing with. Or hell, play the Vampire Counts with their massive diplomatic ability through vassalization. You have so many choices in that campaign. There's better campaigns, there's better races with this kind of playstyle. And hell, even Astankia is better than Tzeentch, any of the Tzeentchian factions, in terms of powerful campaign effects from Magic. That's what I would... Like, these are the kind of things that need to be changed. Like, if there's an overhaul, it needs to be with making Tzeentch actually compelling to play, as opposed to Warriors of Chaos. The Changeling, they went... Like, the problem with the Changeling, they went further down that gimmick. Sure, the Changeling has good casualty replenishment, good income. So he fixes two of the major issues. And because of the way the income works in his campaign and the way the fact that he doesn't have a growth system, he can get a decent number of heroes, but he's still fairly limited in that respect. But it just feels like a meaningless campaign as well. I think Creative Assembly needs to ask themselves, how do they make a campaign compelling within the context of Immortal Empires? While obviously still maintaining a good amount of variety. Costin signing out.